Good to see you again, and welcome
Yes,
back to the interview, I guess.
thank you. It was so good to see you yesterday. It's not
I
often that
know.
happens.
It was so much fun. I was glad to see everybody there. They asked really good questions. For those of you who don't know, Maggie did an author event yesterday, and I got to attend. So it was a lot of fun, and here we are, back to back. Well, let's go ahead and jump right in. Uh, I was just telling people watching that your book series, The Griffith Brothers, has been picked up by Berkeley, and so they are all being re-released with new covers. I tried to match a little bit. I don't know.
I
This is the
think it
closest.
works.
This is the closest I can come. So I want to know how that happened, what that experience has been like. Is it just so insane? Are you so happy? Like, tell me everything.
It was at this point like it's normal because we've gone through the process of getting it to market. Um, Last year was probably the wildest year I've ever had. Um, so I released them indie, and between book two and book three is when we started having some of these conversations. Um, and so it felt like it was a really fast process of okay, there's people interested. Is this something I want to do? Talking through all of those things with my agent, and then to saying yes. And then I said yes to Berkeley like 3 days after book three came out last September, and then everything slows down. And so there's a long waiting period as we go through contract negotiations and kind of the not so fun stuff. um, and then we got to announce it in February, and then immediately hit the ground running with adding the two new bonus chapters, doing a cover change, and really um, just beefing it up to hit a new market. And it's been a whirlwind year. It's been really busy, um, but I'm just so thrilled.
Was it hard for you to kind of, I mean, when you're indie, you get to control it all. So was it difficult for you to say like, okay, sure, let's do a new cover. Okay, sure, critique my writing and have me add stuff or change stuff. Like, what was that process like?
I thought it was going to be a lot more difficult than it was, like, if I'm being completely honest. I have a fantastic editor, and so her feedback, like, I trust it 100%. Um, but I feel like I've also become much more relaxed with accepting edits and critique from the editorial team. I used to be much more high strung about it, and now I'm like, okay, cool, let's do that. Like, I have no qualms with it. Um, and yeah, like the first cover that they sent over, it was a little bit of a conversation of do we keep the indie cover, do we do a new one? And I'm really excited that it got a new little cover makeover. Um, but yeah, like I feel like I'm really laid back in that sense, and there's not many hills I'm gonna die on. And so it was a really easy process. And like I said, I have such a great team, and they just made everything so easy. There were a few things that, like, in the back of my head, I was like, my things that I was not really willing to do was to tone down Cassandra. Um, that was like my one sticking point, and it never came up, like not once. And so just from the get-go, they were so supportive of that character, the character arc, and that's how I knew like we had found the right publishing home.
I think, was that today's newsletter that you talked about that in?
Maybe,
I don't
if
know.
I'm
There
being
was
honest, I can't remember what I put in today's newsletter.
I think I remember reading about that, and it was really recently. And I loved that for you because I know that that is like she is such a powerhouse of a character, which I think we're gonna get to in a little bit. But I'm so glad. Like I think that that's got definitely, like you said, got to be a moment where you're like, yes, this is the place for me. Like they
Yes,
get what I'm going with here.
for
So
sure.
for those who don't know, there is a fourth brother, and he has his own book, Stars Above Us. So, when you wrote this book, did you know that you were going to go into the Griffith Brothers series?
Yes. Um, so I knew that I was going to do the series, and it always just kept getting pushed off. And it would be like, oh, I have this better idea. I'm going to write this series, and then I'll get around to the Griffith Brothers series when that one's done. And it just kept getting like knocked one book back every single time. And I'm so glad that it happened that way because I grew so much as a writer between that first book that I call my like ugly first pancake, where it's delicious, people like it, it still tastes good. It's not pretty. Um, but I grew so much as a writer between book one and I think when Dust Storm came out as an indie book, it was book 15. And so there was a huge amount of growth, and I found my voice and I found my style. And having that waiting process, when I finally did come back to it, it was the right book at the right time for me, and it was the right book at the right time for readers as well. And kind of finding that magic where we all kind of hit the same thing at the same time, I think is really what gave it so much success the first time.
So I think that cowboy romance right now is really big, and there's all kinds of factors. It can be Yellowstone, it can be all kinds of different things, but the fact is, it is really big right now. So do you think any of that had an influence on you? Like, that's why you wanted to write a cowboy romance, or was it just like, this is how they popped into my brain, and this is what I'm gonna do?
It's a little bit of both. Like we talked about, I knew from the get-go that they're cattle ranchers because I talked about it in Nate's book, The Stars Above Us. He's kind of telling Bex like about his family, and at the very end, they move back to the ranch, and you meet Christian, you meet the girls, and so I was kind of setting it up. So I knew in the back of my head, 4-ish years ago, it was going to be cowboys. And it just happened to be at the time of Elsie Silver knocking literally everything out of the park, Lila Sage just absolutely crushing it, and cowboy romance really blowing up. And so it's like that little bit of magic that I was talking about where we found like the perfect intersection of waiting and then striking when the time was right.
I love that so much, and it has been so fun to just like watch it blossom. And I mean, it's always existed, but I think it's really having its moment. So I just hope like
Yeah.
all the people that can get in on it, I hope they do, because I mean, everyone's eating it up like candy, myself included. So we will take them all. Um, I think I have a little bit of insight here, but I want other people to get some more about your writing process, and especially regarding series. So, The Stars Above Us technically is a standalone, but it can be lumped into this because it is the same brother. But what would you say is the most difficult part of writing a series versus a standalone?
I very much prefer writing series. Standalones give me so much anxiety because you have to pack everything into one book. What I love about writing a series is that, especially with the Griffith Brothers, you can widen the scope of what the reader sees with every book. And so you don't have to tackle it all at once. But I think with that, the hardest part of writing a series is finding, continuity between the books so that they all feel the same, readers know what to expect, but um, giving each story something a little bit different. Each character brings something new so that it doesn't feel repetitive and, kind of the same old, same old.
Well, I was definitely going to ask about your characters and how you keep the stories fresh and the characters fresh when you're writing them, and they're all so closely connected within the same environment.
Yeah, I think it sounds very like artsy fartsy, but like I really just try to let the characters talk to me and like tell me what their stories are going to be. And a lot of it is kind of experimental of just sitting around and daydreaming and thinking, what would happen if insert here? So what would happen if a bull rider, had this horrible accident and his life changed forever? What does that look like now? What happens if a woman who is not a kid person falls in love with a single dad? And so asking all of those like what if questions really helps shape the characters and kind of like helps define their identity so that it's not just a carbon copy over and over and over again.
I love that. And it's so fun. It's like you said, every single book you get a little bit more of each character. And I really like loved Christian's Girls and watching them throughout this series, like grow up, because I feel like children are just such a timeline, like you can feel like you're
Yeah.
the same forever, but they really show you that that's not true. So you've done such a fun job of just like I think even letting characters that aren't the main characters evolve, which is so nice to see and isn't something you always get to see. So, speaking about Dust Storm specifically, I really appreciate that Christian isn't like your stereotypical cover boy. And I wanted to know why that was important to you. He is a larger man, he is an older man. I mean, not like, he's not a 7-year-old man, but he's not your typical like 20-year-old washboard abs. Like, why was that something you wanted to include?
I think it's been a conscious choice over all of my books that I've really tried to kind of hone in on is portraying characters as realistically as possible while also kind of, leaving the fantasy alive of book boyfriends are better than the real thing. Um, and so with my male characters, I really tried to think about like, okay, it's a lot of effort to maintain the washboard abs and the ripped muscles. Like that's a full-time job. So when I'm writing my bodyguards, my athletes, they're gonna have the washboard abs and the muscles. And when I'm thinking about a single dad who really doesn't have time to himself, he at one point was the cow boss where he was doing all of the manual labor, but now a lot of his job is administrative. So he's a little bit more sedentary. Like he's really not going to be this ripped big guy. Um, but I think for his character specifically, it adds a lot of unspoken depth to the story because you have Cassandra who comes from a world where she has to be perfect. And I think she really loves being a girly girl. She loves high heels and makeup and all that stuff. And he loves that for her. But I think that she also sees that as this like armor of I have to be perfect. I have to be at the top of my game. And so being with somebody who doesn't put that pressure on her, and she realizes like I can be comfortable in my own skin because he's comfortable in his own skin, I think gives her just the opportunity for huge character growth. Um, and honestly, I love a big guy. I love a big burly man. So I was in a happy place writing Christian.
I love that. um, we've both mentioned that he is a single father multiple times. It's kind of his whole thing at this point. Um, and, they have their own painful backstory for as young as they are. So I want to talk about the elements that you had to be mindful of while writing children characters and how do you keep them a part of the story without neglecting them and also not making them the main thing.
Um, that was something that I really struggled with because I've written single parent books before, and I do take feedback into consideration of readers going, "Oh, the kids were in this too much," or "What happened to the kids? Like, are they here?" And so I really tried to be mindful of where the girls are, what they're doing, and so I added a lot of mentions of like they're at school, they're in extracurricular activities, or they're home and they're just, vibing and chilling. And so, and then you see a lot of those moments where Christian and Cassandra have one-on-one time be after they go to bed. Um, so really just trying to be mindful of like giving them something to do that's not out of the ordinary, but also having them around enough to kind of build that family dynamic.
We mentioned Cassandra being kind of just this powerhouse, larger than life woman. And you talked earlier about how it was really important to you not to tone her down. I want to just know what was the most fun about bringing her to life. She's so just larger than life. She's like the kind of character that jumps off the page, and I'm sure it was so enjoyable. But what are some of the most fun elements of that?
I loved putting her in situations that she was not comfortable, because she doesn't hide her reactions, she doesn't pretend like it's okay. um you know Most other people when they are kind of stranded without a good living situation would be like, okay, I'm just going to go with the flow and say like this is fine, and she kind of looks everybody in the eye at the very beginning. She's like, this is not okay, figure it out. um, but I also love putting her in situations where she thrives and she gets to use all of those PR publicist, very, I don't want to say manipulative, but she's a little bit manipulative. um, because she is good at understanding people. And so when you have situations like when Christian's daughter gets dress coded and she gets to step in and she gets to handle the situation the way that she would in her former life, um, you really see her shine. And so she just, anytime I got to play around with her character, I was having a blast because it was either one or the other. She was either in her element and crushing it, or she was so out of it, and I was just sitting back and laughing the whole time.
I think that she does a great job. When I think of her in those situations, I kind of think of the duck and the feet underwater. Like she can look like she's got a like knows what she's doing, and then underwater her feet are just like going
Yes,
crazy.
very,
But
very much.
I also really appreciate her as a character because I think that she can just be such a positive role model for people that maybe aren't always the best at standing up for themselves. I'm happy to say that's not a problem that I have, but I know that just reading that on the page can be so empowering for someone to be like, I actually can say what I need or I want, and that's okay. The world's not going to end.
Yes, 100%.
So, what is something that you hope readers, if there's just like, if they can only take away one thing, they can only retain one thing, what would you want that to be from this book specifically?
I think just this sense of confidence of whether you want to be confrontational, whether you want to say, you know what, it's fine, because you see that in both Christian and Cassandra in different ways. Christian's confidence is so calm, and he's just like, okay, like if that happens, it happens. It's going to be fine. It's going to be okay. And then you see Cassandra's confidence in the other way where she's very confrontational. She's like, absolutely not. This is not okay. And now I'm going to tell you why. Um, and both are okay, and there's so much strength in both.
I feel like that's often, that's what they say, opposites attract and all that. But so often you find those couples who one person is very much like, don't mess with me and don't mess with them. And the other person is like, I'm just gonna be around and I'm gonna just chill and let things happen.
Yes.
So, one of the questions I did ask yesterday, and I really enjoyed your answer, so I hope you don't mind me throwing it in here, was about romance readers and writers and how oftentimes we are kind of dismissed. We're not taken seriously in like the literary community. So, want to know if this is something that you've experienced and, how you respond to that.
Yeah, all the time. Um, for the longest time, really for years, my family did not know I was an author. And it's still something that I keep very private from them, but I'm like wide open about it on the internet. So it's like the worst kept secret ever. Um, but as family members have begun to find out, they're not romance readers. And so they have all of those preconceived notions about what the romance genre is. And oftentimes it comes from a place of ignorance, of assuming uh, that there is no value to romance books based on the way that they're portrayed in media and online. Um, but I really do try to be generous with my time when I'm criticized or maybe poked fun at for loving romance and writing romance. Because again, it's coming from a place of ignorance. And so if I can sit down with somebody and be like, well, actually, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about psychology, we're talking about interpersonal relationships. Yes, we're talking about sex because that is such a huge way that human beings relate to one another, especially in intimate romantic relationships. Um, and really kind of like having those conversations to not convince them that they should read romance, because if you don't like it, that's totally fine. But that there is so much value because you're gaining empathy, you're gaining insight into experiences that are not your own. And I think, like I mentioned yesterday, we all often look at ourselves as the main characters. And something I've tried to do intentionally is decentralize myself from my own reading experiences where I'm not the main character. I'm sitting on the sidelines watching this play out so that I can learn, I can gain insight, empathy, and understanding for what somebody else may be going through. And I think that the more people do that, whether it's through reading romance or whether it's just through, talking to somebody, asking really good questions about their lives, and listening to understand instead of listening to respond or clap back, um, we're going to become better human beings. And I love how romance books have given me a little piece of that in my own life. And so the more that I can, spread the word and um, share how much I love them and why I think that they're so impactful. And apart from that, they're just fun. The world is a crazy, scary place, and so the more that we can have hope and we can have escapism, the more we're going to be prepared to do and to confront all of those big, scary things.
I love that so much. And I love that you are the kind of person that doesn't mind taking the time. Because, I mean, honestly, so many of us are just kind of like, you know what, whatever, you don't know what you're talking about. So I think it's very special that you would take the time to kind of have those conversations. And I often think about, people, there's so much like television and drama movies, action movies, like hardly any of them have no sort of romantic connection whatsoever. And people like that's what I often bring it back to. I'm like, you don't mind this in your like Mission Impossible movies. You don't mind this in this and that's more of like a reduced way to kind of talk about it, but I feel like people don't put that all together all the time. Like you're seeing it
Yeah,
everywhere. You're just choosing where to not think that it's okay. So it's a long conversation, one that
it
will go
is.
on for a long time.
Yes.
So I don't know, what number book are you at writing currently?
Writing, I just finished 22, but
Okay.
I'm writing ahead at this point because I do have a few more books coming out with Berkeley. And so now I'm writing on the traditionally published schedule, which is like years in advance versus the indie schedule, which is like write a book, edit a book, release a book.
Right. What I asked that for is because we talked about how Dust Storm was, I think, book 15 when you wrote it. Now you're at book 22. So when you're doing stuff like this, how much do you have to go back and refresh yourself? Because it's like you were with them, but now you're gone.
All the time. And I'm so bad at it. I will finish writing a book and then the very next day I'll be like, I have no idea what I put in that book. And it's like I just spent the last 3 months working on it. So I actually read Dust Storm last week because I was like, I know I'm going into this cycle of promotion, and I was like, I honestly I remember the highlights, but there's just so much that I forget in between. And so it was a really fun refresh, and I fell in love with the characters all over again.
I love that. I worry sometimes that people aren't able to enjoy their own art because we are our worst critics. So I'm happy that you're able to go back and just kind of see it as like this happy time capsule.
Yeah, and that's what I feel like it is, and especially like the audiobook comes out tomorrow as well. And so hearing it in kind of a new format with new voices really brings it to life in a new way. And so you kind of get that like first read experience just in a little bit of a different way.
So we've already talked. This year has been a really busy year for you. I can't keep up with how many books you've put out, but it's what, four, something like that at least. You've got the audiobook coming, Dust Storm releases tomorrow. How have you navigated celebrating all of these amazing, happy accomplishments, but also taking time for yourself? Because this is your art, it's also your job. How do you kind of step back and just take you time?
Um, I don't do it well. It's something that I'm having to work on. I'm so blessed. I have the best husband, the best partner, and for my birthday, which was a couple weeks ago, I went to a hotel by myself. I didn't work. I didn't have to be mom, and I just sat around and watched Netflix and ate room service, and it was fantastic. Um, and so having somebody who supports me in that way, who recognizes, like, especially when jobs are very much tied to social media. And so I'm on my phone constantly, I'm on the computer constantly. Um, and so having a partner who recognizes that I need time away to just be myself and not be this version that is my brand. We have a standing lunch date on Fridays. We go to this little barbecue place and we don't talk about work because he also works with me. And so that kind of adds a different level of like the job coming home with you. So yeah, we have, standing dates where we don't talk about work. We'll just shoot the breeze. Um, with celebrating, there, like you said, there's been so much going on this year. And so I try to celebrate things when they happen rather than waiting for like the culmination of release day. And so, like with Dust Storm, I celebrated when I said yes to the deal. I celebrated when I signed the contract. I celebrated when the covers were done or when we got to announce it. And, that kind of like I don't want to say keeps me going, but it does help keep things in perspective where you're not just waiting for this one day that's 9 months in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that it's helpful. Every single piece is a milestone, and it's more fun to celebrate each milestone versus, like you said, the one day where it's like 24 hours over and now we move on. So I think that's so important. That's how I am. So
Yeah.
I love any reason to celebrate. Um, Again, everybody, Dust Storm comes out tomorrow, which at the time of this conversation is going to be October 7th, 2025. But there's two other books in this series. What's coming down the road for them?
So Downpour comes out December 16th, which is like the week before Christmas. So it's going to be a very crazy time. Fireline comes out the first Tuesday in March of next year. Um, and so I'm so excited to celebrate both of those. I feel like, getting to the Death Storm release tomorrow is, like you said, it's a milestone, but it's also the catalyst for these other two books. And so I'm so excited for readers to dive in with book one and then know that book two is right around the corner coming in December.
You mentioned, and I don't want to like put any pressure on you to talk about any other projects, but you did mention you have other stuff coming through with Berkeley. I'm I am curious about that, but I'm also more curious about how you manage to do traditional and indie at the same time because you are still doing both. So how do you switch it in your brain?
Logistically, like my uh contracts, and I feel like that I'm not like sharing insider information. I feel like this is actually pretty widely known, but often when you're hybrid you have non-compete areas, and so like right now I can't release an indie book because we're about to release Duststorm, and so there are these windows where I can release indie books, and so I do have some of those coming up next year, so there will be more indie stuff coming. um Mentally I feel like it's a little bit of a trip sometimes because I've written two traditionally published books that are set for like years in advance. And then now I'm about to jump into writing a new indie book. And I'm like, oh, this is actually coming out and it's not that far away. Um, and so that'll be interesting because this will be the first indie one that I've kind of done after doing those other two books. And so I'm excited to jump into something that is like totally different, totally, outside of what I've been doing this year.
Do you want or can you give us any sort of insight as to any of these projects?
The publicly available information for the Berkeley projects is that it is two new cowboy Western books in a new series. It is not attached to the Griffith Brothers. Um, and so I have absolutely fallen in love with this new world. I'm so excited. It's a couple tropes that I've never done before. And so I just had an absolute blast writing them. On the indie side, we're going back into romantic suspense, which I absolutely love. Like that is where my heart is right now, and so I'm really excited to dive back into that.
I am so impressed with people that write romantic suspense. I can't navigate how I would click that into my brain, like shifting between the emotions and all of the things. So I'm excited about that one. And this was a question that was supposed to be our last question, but one more is how do you research to write cowboy romance? Do you research or are you kind of just like, you know what, I'm gonna hope that this is correct? Like, what is that process? Because you're not living on a ranch. So that's not your everyday life. So what's the research process like that for that?
It really depends. There's a lot of like going back into the Griffiths with Christian's book, it's a lot of the like logistics and day to day. And I do have some connections within like the cattle ranching world. And so it was kind of easy to be like, hey, is this right? You know, are they doing the right things? With Ray in book two, I am not a rodeo fanatic. I'm not a professional bull rider. And so that took a little bit more research. So I watched, tons of videos, interviews. I really try to hear people who are doing that thing talk about that thing. Um, because one, they're going to be the most knowledgeable about it. You're not just reading, a Google summary, but you're also hearing them talk about it in their own type of language, in the same way that you hear medical professionals kind of talk about, healthcare in their own way that you don't necessarily hear the rest of us talking about it. And so the more that I can actually connect with people, and it's one of my favorite things because I just love learning. And so I'll go down rabbit holes that never even make it into the book.
That's so fun. I'm sure that you have gotten so much information that is just like that's a fun Jeopardy fact there.
I feel like authors would be so good at Jeopardy or trivia.
I agree with you. Well, everyone, Dust Storm with the traditionally published cover comes out tomorrow, and so does the audiobook. Maggie, thank you so much for joining me. I always love chatting with you,
Yeah,
and maybe for one of these next projects, we can do it again because I love having you here.
absolutely. Anytime.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.